Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Jaya Srimad Bhagavatam, Jaya Srimad Bhagavatam, Sanyash Ashram ki Jai, Namacharya Haridas Thakur ki Jai. Param Sagaho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Gaur Bhakti Vrinda ki Jai, Sri Sri Radha Krishna Gopa Govida Shama Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan ki Jai, Sri Vrindavan Dham ki Jai, Navadhatam ki Jai, Ganga Jamuna Tulasi Bhakti Devi ki Jai, Ananda Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki Jai, Samavetta Bhakti Vrinda ki Jai, Go Premanandi. All glories to assembled devotees, all glories to assembled devotees, all glories to assembled devotees, all glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswata Deve Gauravani Prachadane Nirvashesha Shunyavadi Paschatchadesha Chadane Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasudi Gaur Bhakti Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam Canto 1 Chapter 19 verse 4. Sachintaya Nityam Atasranodhyata Mune Sutokta Nritis Takshakakya Sasadu Mene Nachareda Takshaka Nalam Prasakta Sya Virakti Karanam Sa He Chintayan thinking itam like this ata now asranot heard yata as mune of the sages sutta ukta uttered by the sun nirti death takshaka akya in relation with the snake bird sa he sadhu well and good mene accepted na not chirena a very long time takshaka snake bird analam fire prasaktasya for one who was too attached virakti indifference karanam cause. Translation: while the king was thus repenting, he received news of his imminent death, which would be due to the bite of a snake bird occasioned by the curse spoken by the sage's son. The king accepted this as good news, for it would be the cause of his indifference towards worldly things. Purport: real happiness is achieved by spiritual existence or by cessation of the repetition of birth and death. One can stop the repetition of birth and death only by going back to Godhead. In the material world, even by attaining the topmost planet, Brahmaloka, we cannot get rid of the conditions of repeated birth and death. But still we do not accept the path of attaining perfection. The path of perfection frees one from all material attachments, and thus one becomes fit to enter into the spiritual kingdom. Therefore, those who are materially poverty-stricken are better candidates than those who are materially prosperous. Maharaj Parikshit was a great devotee of the Lord and a bona fide candidate for entering into the kingdom of God. But even though he was so, his material assets as the emperor of the world were setbacks to perfect attainment of his rightful status as one of the associates of the Lord in the spiritual sky. As a devotee of the Lord, you could understand that the cursing of the Brahmana boy, although unwise, was a blessing upon him, being the cause of detachment from worldly affairs, both political and social. Samika Muni also, after regretting the incident, conveyed the news to the king as a matter of duty so that the king would be able to prepare himself to go back to Godhead. Samika Muni sent news to the king that foolish shrinking his son, although a powerful Brahmana boy, unfortunately had misused his spiritual powers by cursing the king unwarrantedly. The incident of the king's garlanding the Muni was not sufficient cause for being cursed to death, but since there was no way to retract the curse, the king was informed to prepare for death within a week. Both Samika Muni and the king were self-realized souls. Samika Muni was a mystic, and Maharaj Parikshit was a devotee. Therefore, there was no difference between them in self-realization. Neither of them was afraid of meeting death. Maharaj Parikshit could have gone to the Muni to beg his pardon, but the news of imminent death was conveyed to the king with so much regret by the Muni that the king did not want to shame the Muni further by his presence there. He decided to prepare himself for his imminent death and find out the way to go back to Godhead. The life of a human being is a chance to prepare oneself to go back to Godhead or to get rid of material existence, the repetition of birth and death. Thus, in the system of Varnashram Dharma, every man and woman is trained for this purpose. In other words, the system of Varnashram Dharma is known also as Sanatana Dharma, or the eternal occupation. The system of Varnashram Dharma prepares the man for going back to Godhead, and thus a householder is ordered to go to the forest as vanaprastha to acquire complete knowledge and then to take sannyas prior to his inevitable death. Maharaj Parikshit was fortunate to get a 7-day notice to meet his inevitable death. But for the common man, there is no definite notice, although death is inevitable for all. Foolish men forget this sure fact of death and neglect the duty of preparing themselves for going back to Godhead. They spoil their lives in animal propensities to eat, drink, be merry, and enjoy. Such an irresponsible life is adopted by the people in the age of Kali because of a sinful desire to condemn Brahminical culture, God consciousness, and cow protection, for which the state is responsible. The state must employ revenue to advance these 3 items and thus educate the populace to prepare for death. The state, which does so, is the real welfare state. The state of India should better follow the examples of Maharaj Parikshit, the ideal executive head, than to imitate other materialistic states which have no idea of the kingdom of God, the ultimate goal of human life. Deterioration of the ideals of Indian civilization has brought about the deterioration of civic life, not only in India but also abroad. Translation: while the king was thus repenting, he received news of his imminent death, which would be due to the snake bite of a snake bird, occasioned by the curse spoken by the sage's son. The king accepted this as good news, for it would be the cause of his indifference towards worldly things. So here in the last part of the verse, there is an explanation here that this curse would be the cause of detachment. Because due to the curse, Parikshit would know that he had to die very quickly, so obviously he would be forced to give up everything anyway. So it's a good chance to become detached if you know you're going to die. Of course, that's unfortunately doesn't happen in many cases we see in this world. People don't get detached. Even if they know they're going to die, they don't get detached. They just become miserable, that's all. So detachment, of course, is one quality of advancing the spiritual life, but we shouldn't think that that's the only qualification for spiritual life. So sometimes we think of the grihastha taking vanaprastha and then sannyas as a mode of detachment, which it is, because the householder has to give up his family members and his house and go to the forest and sleep on the floor, on the ground, and eat wild fruit and wild roots. So that's a detachment for a householder. And then if he's sannyasi, he has to give up his wife also. So that, in that sense, those ashramas, the last two ashramas are meant for detachment. And we see also the brahmachari life is one of detachment. The brahmachari is not supposed to wear shoes or wear fancy clothes or ride in vehicles, or he lives very simply, and he eats only after instructed by the guru, etc. So he's a very, very simple life as well. So that's detachment again. But that's not the ultimate goal. There is detachment there, and if it's only the goal, it will lead to liberation, mukti. So often sannyasa is equated with mukti or liberation. But the devotees are not interested in liberation. In fact, they reject liberation completely and they detest it. So detachment is important, and they say one of the principal elements of liberation, which we don't want, but other people may want. But it is also not completely opposed to prema, which is the goal of the devotees. But if we emphasize it too much, then it becomes a problem. So in Nectar of Devotion, there Rupa Goswami makes it clear that vairagya, or detachment, and jnana are not to be cultivated within bhakti as elements. They're not angas of bhakti like hearing and chanting and associating with devotees. They're not like that. He says, and they're a little favorable in the beginning. In other words, we should understand we're not the body, which is jnana, we're the soul, as Krishna teaches in Bhagavad Gita chapter 2. We should have some detachment. We should not be too attached. So Bhagavatam says that the qualification for bhakti is not to be too attached to material enjoyment. So yes, some vairagya is there. So in that sense is favorable to bhakti. However, if in our devotional service we emphasize this jnana aspect and the detachment aspect too much, it pollutes the bhakti. So we have our definition of devotional service. Anya abhilasha shunya, jnana karma jnanavartam. It is not to be covered by jnana or karma, etc., which means sankhya, detachment, yoga, etc. None of these should obstruct the bhakti in any way. When they start to become dominant and obstruct the bhakti, then the bhakti is no longer pure bhakti. It is not uttama bhakti anymore. So if we don't have uttama bhakti in sadhana, we cannot get to prema. So in other words, we can have that mixture, and if it's strong enough, then we will get something, but we won't get prema. So that's the whole idea. So therefore, these other sadhanas of jnana and detachment, vairagya or virakti, are not emphasized so much for the devotee. They're not necessarily there because if we're too attached, we cannot practice bhakti. And therefore we have the 10th aparad to the holy name, which is to be too materially attached and involved in I and mine. And if we are, then it is very difficult to practice bhakti. It is very difficult to surrender. If we're very attached to our own identity in this world, we cannot admit that I'm the servant of Krishna eternally. We can't do that. We have to have some sort of detachment. But we overemphasize that, then it starts mixing up the bhakti. So for the jnanis and the yogis, yes, virakti is very important. It's part of their sadhana. It's the anga of their sadhana. But for the devotees, it is not. So the principal angas for the devotee are hearing the holy name, chanting the holy name, hearing scripture, associating with devotees, worshipping the deity, living in the holy place, etc. These are the angas that manifest bhakti rather than just create detachment. However, when we practice devotional service, we become more attached to the Lord. That means we give everything to the Lord. That means we give up our sense of I and mine. So consequently, naturally, we become detached. So this virakti becomes manifest automatically with the development of devotional service. So that is what is said in the first canto Bhagavatam, that jnana and vairagya automatically manifest for the devotee. They're automatically accomplished. So therefore we can't get too involved in the detachment aspect of things. Otherwise it may contaminate the devotional service. So, nevertheless, even for the devotee, one should have a sufficient amount of detachment so that he is not held back. So we have the example of the wedding party and the boatman. So the wedding party wants to go up the river to go to the wedding. So they decide, we'll have a nice party. We'll get on a boat, and overnight we'll have a nice party, then we'll go to sleep. And when we wake up in the morning, we'll be at the other village up the river. So they hire the boat, and they tell the boatman, they go to so-and-so village up the river, and you got to, pull all night and get up there. So they have the nice party all night, and then go to sleep. And they get up in the morning, and then they say, oh, we're at the next village. And when the sun rises and they look around, hey, we're in the same place. And then they accuse the boatman, hey, you went to sleep, you didn't pull your boat up the river. And so I was working all night. And then someone looks in the water, and there's an anchor stuck in the thing. So he's rowing on that, it doesn't move anywhere. So we get too much material attachment. No matter how much bhakti we do, we don't go very far. We get stuck in the same place. So in that sense, yes, we do have to have some detachment. But to practice that detachment, that becomes a little problem for us. It'll contaminate the bhakti and take us toward liberation and impersonalism. Put us in that direction. That will weaken the bhakti. So we do have to have some detachment in the beginning. And at a certain stage, the devotee may realize, all of this material attachment is useless, and he voluntarily gives it up as well. He may do that as well. And then sometimes the Supreme Lord may think, he's too attached. Let's speed up his devotional service. Let's take everything away from him. So then Krishna takes everything away. And then the person's left with nothing, and then they surrender completely to Krishna. So that's another option. The Lord himself may take away everything, and then a person automatically becomes detached. So we see that in the case of the Avanti Brahmana. He was not really a devotee or anything, but he was also a fallen Brahmana because he was too attached to his house, and then they kicked him out of the house. So he was left with nothing, automatically. Then he surrendered to the Lord. So that was a cause of his advancement. And he became detached necessarily, but he also surrendered to the Supreme Lord. So sometimes the detachment and the forcible detachment even may be helpful for us as we progress in devotional service. At other times, of course, it can be unfavorable, as we see in these examples given in the Nectar of Devotion. It'll mix our bhakti, and we end up with a different type of result. So in this case, Parikshit Maharaj found this curse very favorable. I said, now I can give up the kingdom. I'll have to give up the kingdom. And Then the other thing was that not only he has to give up the kingdom automatically and become detached from it, but there's something more than that. Not, in other words, if you're simply a Gyani, fine, I'll give up everything, fine, and I'll just meditate and I'll go to Brahman. But Parikshit was not like that. So for 7 days he was sitting there, and then he called all the sages. He said, "What should I do?" And they all gave different answers. Okay, meditate, do this, do sacrifices, karma kanda, jnana, yoga. He was not impressed with any of that. And when Sukadev Goswami came and says, you hear about the pastimes of the Lord, chant the name of the Lord, then he said, that's the right thing. And then Sukadev began to speak to him. So, in other words, this gave an opportunity for Parikshit not just to become detached, but to concentrate fully on his preparation to meet the Supreme Lord through devotional service. So for the devotees, therefore, this virakti or detachment is okay, acceptable, but it's not our main sadhana, and we can accept it as a favorable item for advancing towards Krishna as long as it gives us opportunity to engage more in devotional service. So that is the sense in which Chaitanya Mahaprabhu took sannyas. So on the one hand, the Sanyash Ashram is more associated with the Mayavadis and all this renunciation, etc. But Lord Chaitanya, when he took sannyas, then he quoted this verse of the Avanti Brahmana, which indicates that sannyas, when nyasa means to give up, of course, samnyas means give up everything. And he says, the real sannyas is not to give up everything, but to give everything to Krishna. So it's an opportunity to serve Krishna more. That's what sannyas is. And because we're less attached to material things, we can concentrate on our service to the Supreme Lord. So that's the real sannyas. In which case, the external ashram does not matter. You could be a grihasta, but if you're completely attached to the Lord, you won't be much interested in those activities of the grihasta, and you'll dedicate yourself fully to serving Krishna, as we see in the case of someone like Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who had 13 children or something, whatever. But he was constantly studying, researching, chanting, giving lectures, etc. Through a major part of his life, even when he was working. So, therefore, the external is not so important, but that internal dedication to the Lord, and consequently, gives us the detachment itself. So, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he actually doesn't emphasize so much the detachment aspect, even though he took sannyas. He didn't emphasize that so much. Rather, he emphasizes simply execution of devotional service and chanting the holy name. That's the main process by which we advance. Everything else is secondary to that. And as we see, we have, grihetako, vanetako. You can remain in the house, that's the grihasta. You can be in the forest. You can be a sannyasi or a renounced or babaji or whatever. Doesn't matter. You chant Hare Krishna. And so it's not that the sannyas automatically guarantees you prema and grihasta ashram doesn't. No. Any ashram, any varna, it doesn't really matter as long as you absorb yourself more and more in devotional service. So that is the main principle. And of course, devotional service for us is chanting the holy name. So the Lord Chaitanya put less emphasis on that whole system in that sense. The main thing is to advance through the sadhana itself and not identify with the externals. But of course, then we can say, well, then why did Bhaktisiddhanta introduce Sanyash Ashram? And then why was there previously not the Sanyash Ashram? Of course, the Babajis were always there after the Goswamis, and we have the renounced people in Vrindavan. Why do they bother? And the answer to that one is, of course, that some people are naturally more detached, and therefore it is favorable to them to practice the detached life. So if they're qualified, then they can become renounced. They're not really interested in material life anyway, but why do they have to bother with it? Let them become renounced persons, like Babajis or sannyasis or whatever. So some people, that's not so common. But some people are at that stage where they are detached. And especially some people, when they're older, may reach that stage. So we see that Bhaktivinoda Thakur, when he was old, then he took a Babaji ashram. Others, when they get old, they take sannyas. So that's one item. The other, of course, is that with the Babaji ashram, of course, there is no marks. So in one sense, it's not a status as such in one sense, unless you make it a status of having a uniform like a Babaji, and then everyone says he's a Babaji, and they start giving you respect because of that. Then it becomes also just some sort of superficial thing. But then with sannyas, of course, there is certain marks, the orange or red cloth, etc., the danda, etc. There's certain markings for sannyas, the external markings like that. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur introduced that Sanyash Ashram in his mat, in his ashram. Not for everyone, for qualified people, again, those who were of, let's say, renounced tendencies anyway. So let them fully practice. So it was, we can say, some arrangement for his ashram. So the sannyasi could become the leader of the ashram, and in the ashram it was all brahmacharis basically, and the grihasthas didn't even live there at all. So it was just the sannyasi was the head of the ashram. So it was an organizational mood on his part to distinguish the sannyasi from the other brahmacharis. So in any case, the idea is that it's not the markings or it's not the name of the ashram itself, but it is simply the dedication to the Supreme Lord. And the more we become attached to the Lord, the less attached we are to the material world, and so the virakti automatically manifests. For one who is attached, of course, or one who is a grihastha, if he loses everything, there's a problem in one sense, because he has no means of maintaining his family. So in that sense, a disaster. Then he has to start all over doing that. However, if he's at a more advanced stage or older, where he doesn't need to support the family so much, then losing everything can also be a great blessing. So we see that in the case of Srila Prabhupada, when one of his workers stole all the goods from his chemistry shop. Then he said, he wasn't too upset by the whole thing. This is a good opportunity. Now I can renounce everything anyway. And so then he went off to Vrindavan after that, and then later on he took sannyas. Family was taken care of, etc. So according to the situation, the grihastha, if he is forcibly made to renounce things, then if he is older especially, then he could use that as an opportunity for advancing in devotional service. If he has responsibilities, however, he cannot give those up and just use that as an excuse to give up everything and neglect his responsibilities to the family. So in this case then, this virakti, or this detachment, was favorable because he gave the opportunity to Parikshit to fully concentrate upon worshiping the Supreme Lord and hearing about the Supreme Lord. I mentioned previously that in general, people, even if they know they're going to die, they don't take advantage of that. They simply worry or lament or whatever. So this is a big problem. Some people may. They may get a little bit of a realization. Some don't. And therefore, some people may change their life. Other people not. Here we see that Parikshit was an ideal example, so he took advantage of that very nicely. In near-death experience, people have experiences of almost dying and they come back to life. So in one sense, they get the opportunity. It's almost like death, but it isn't. So they get an opportunity to have a realization of what was the accomplishment of their life. So when they go through this experience and they're out of their body and they go into this other realm, generally they get a replay of their whole life, whatever happened in their life. And at that point, they realize it was all useless. I'm here now in this place, and what is all this useless stuff I'm doing all my life? All the work I've done and all this, what was the whole point of it anyway? I think I missed something. It's all useless. So when they come back to their body, then they realize that, and that's why they change their life, because they realize that everything they've done up to that point was useless. So, of course, if we get that realization 7 days or longer, 5 months ahead of when we're going to die, very good, then we can start doing something about it. But a lot of people don't get that experience even. So in near-death experience, they do that, and then they realize, so it's something like that. They come back, and then they start changing their life, realizing, it was all useless, let's do something else now, and they change their life, etc. So, if a person is fortunate, then he can change himself and do something very nicely when a disaster like this strikes. But unfortunately, people don't have enough knowledge or training or whatever, so therefore, if this happens to them, generally they don't find it advantageous at all, rather they just lament. But here, Parikshit's the opposite. He was not disturbed at all. Okay, any question? Well, it depends. If someone is a sadhana siddha type of person, it's one thing. And if they're a nitya siddha, generally there's a nitya siddhas who go to one universe, to another universe, or another universe. That doesn't mean they're not in the spiritual world. Because when Krishna's going from universe to universe, he's also in the spiritual world with all of his associates. So Krishna's there, the cowherd boys are there, Yasoda is there, Nanda is there, the gopis are all there. Plus simultaneously they're in the material world going from place to place also. So it's not that they leave the spiritual world really, they're also there. So if one is doing sadhana, then two things can happen. He can join the Lord in his pastimes on earth, as he has, when he gets prema, and go through some experience there. Or he gets go directly to the spiritual world. He could also do that, either way. Of course, they're non-different in one sense, because it's the spiritual world within the material world, either way. So he can go that, and then he could continue going on those pastimes in various places in the material world, or he could just be in the spiritual world. But if they're nitya citizens, generally they're in the spiritual world, plus they're also in the material world simultaneously.
In the case of Maharaj Sriksha, do we know? In the case of Maharaj Sriksha, do we know?
It seems to be nitya siddha, as far as we know. Yeah.
Another quick question is this 7-day curse is quite interesting. Is it any particular reason the Acharya's comment why does he need the curse?
1 day.
Why give him 7 days?
I don't think it's mentioned anywhere why 7 days, but obviously it's Krishna's plan in one sense, because then the Bhagavatam would get spoken. If it was immediately, then there would be no Bhagavatam. So it's already explained that the whole arrangement was there, an arrangement of the Lord, so the Bhagavatam gets spoken by Sukadeva to Parikshit. So therefore they needed some time for that. So therefore I guess the Supreme Lord inspired Shringi to make it 7 days rather than 5 hours or something.
You mentioned that renunciation so much. But then, I guess those who were renounced, or in the renounced already, was very strict with their behavior, like with junior higher class. Something like that is very strict on their renunciation. If they were in that renounced order, is that different than emphasizing renunciation?
Yeah.
As which ashram you're in?
Well, as I said, it's not that the devotees are against renunciation, but it's just that they don't emphasize it more than the devotional aspect. So those who are more naturally detached, then they are, if they're qualified, then they can renounce and be like Haridas Thakur or like a Babaji or whatever like that. And therefore we have, along with the generally the householders in the Sampradaya, then we do have the renounced, or as generally they took Babaji rather than sannyas. At Lord Chaitanya's time, there were sannyasis. It looks as if most of them were, or quite a few of them were probably from the Mayavadi line, because they had the name Puri or Tirtar, which is generally often a Mayavad name in Puri. So there was 10 sannyasis, like Paramananda Puri was there, and others were there. In Jagannath Puri with Lord Chaitanya. So there were some sannyasis, like 10 there. And then we have Prabodhananda Saraswati, like that. But then after that, they really didn't have a sannyas, it wasn't cultivated much. Instead of that, they went into the Babaji line. So we have a lot of Babajis. After the Goswamis, and there were people in Vrindavan who were renounced, but similar to sannyasis, but renounced and fully dedicated to devotional process. But the difference was that they had no relationship with Varnashram system. They weren't sannyasis, they weren't no Varna, no ashram. So whereas the sannyasi has signs which distinguish him as a sannyasi in the ashram system. So he has the orange cloth and he has the danda, etc. like that. So there's certain things that distinguish him. So he still has some designation in the Varnashram system. Babaji, no, nothing. White cloth, that's it.
I was thinking more the pastime of junior Haridas, or you like just got some rice from.
And then he got condemned or rejected.
Chaitanya was so strict that he said that he was even happy when he heard that he
disappeared.
His body, his body.
Yeah.
So that he was happy with properly following renunciation.
Yeah. He wasn't really a sannyasi or anything, but he was not married also, it appears. So then he should have been strictly following and not talking to women or whatever like that. And he did happen to beg rice from, and she was a great devotee also, by the way. But even that was enough to upset Lord Chaitanya, so that's why he rejected him. Just to set an example for others.
So he was quite strict then?
Oh yeah, well Lord Chaitanya, yeah. He shouldn't even hear a woman sing. Lord Chaitanya, if you heard a woman sing, then he'd run away.
More of the comments. From my understanding, when he said that in Bhakti we don't cultivate jnana and renunciation, it refers to dry knowledge and dry renunciation, not connected to Bhakti, because all through the Bhagavatam and in the 11th canto when Krishna talks to Uddhava, he's at least 50 verses on glorifying knowledge as the only way to get, not the only way, but the problem with that statement is that sometimes people, devotees, will think, oh, it's okay because I don't need knowledge, I don't need to so I eat as much mama as I want, and I don't read anything, and then I go back to knowledge. But I think even like you mentioned, Lord Chaitanya or even the Goswamis, the more renounced and they have so much knowledge, so we can. So that's my understanding.
When we say jnana, generally we're referring to this impersonal knowledge and speculation and impersonal commentaries on the Brahma Sutras and the Upanishads. We do have jnana, and very necessary, that is Bhagavat jnana or Sambandha jnana or the Bhagavatam. So Shravana means that we're getting knowledge from Bhagavatam, or getting knowledge from the scriptures. So if we don't have that, we cannot advance. So we do need knowledge, but it's devotional knowledge, Bhakti Jnana or whatever. So we have Sambandha Abhidya Prayojana. This is all knowledge that is given through the scriptures. So that's very, very necessary for the devotees. So that's why we can chant the holy name, but we also have Sravana. So the two things necessarily go together.
You mentioned that ultimately it doesn't matter what ashram we're in, we should offer everything to Krishna for his satisfaction. The question is, right now for us, we're not, maybe not all of us are on that stage where we can surrender everything. So my understanding that is that the brahmachari, they're giving up their freedom and they're practicing austerity, and the grihastha, they have a bit of freedom, but the price is that they have a child in Krishna consciousness. So every ashram has a sacrifice and privileges. Like in the single, they don't have that responsibility of family life. And then we also hear sometimes devotees say to single people, oh, you're so lucky, you have freedom, you can do whatever you want. And then the single person is looking at the grihastha saying, oh, you're so lucky, you're married. And everyone's comparing. So how do we come to what's those progressive way of coming to that consciousness that we understand and appreciate where we are at, Bhaktiva Ashram, and then gradually come up to that stage of fully sacrificing to Krishna and not compare and look at others and try to progress in whatever circumstances we are?
Well, we have to accept that everybody's an individual. So some devotees may progress nicely as brahmacharis or sannyasis. Others may not do that. So if they cannot do that, then they should become the grihastas in general. And of course, as grihastas, then they can also progress, so they're not excluded from that. So that's why Lord Chaitanya emphasized whether you're a sannyasi or a grihasta or whatever, it doesn't really matter. You simply perform devotional service. So, of course, in ancient times, it was more difficult for the grihasta to advance spiritually. But at the present time, with Lord Chaitanya, because we do have the main process is chanting the holy name, which is very flexible and very powerful, then this gives more opportunity for the grihasta also than previously with doing other things. So because it's such a powerful and a flexible process, then the householders can also advance very nicely if they can at least take shelter of the holy name.
Just a little point of interest you're mentioning how we at the time of death, how life goes around. Most of us have heard that New Raj but really tells the Prabhupada told him at the time of death their whole life flashes before your eyes. But if you tend to write the yatra, one gets to that and then reads it at that point.
So you're stuck on Krishna. Yeah. So that's your what to say. Even if it's like Yada Sukriti, if you get that somehow accidentally, even to see Jagannath, then that will stick on you and help you advance in devotional service rather than get stuck. Stop the cycle of birth and death.
It stops at that thought, that memory.
Yeah.
The whole life is flashing and
Suddenly it'll stop. Yeah.
And you leave your body.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Hare Krishna.